Hello, I'm Harley Schlanger. It's November 6, 2022, and I'd like to welcome you to a special webcast with the founder and chairwoman of the Schiller Institute, Hельga Ceppp-Lаруш. It's been a while since our last conversation, as Helga's been extraordinarily busy. So we'll catch you up today on what's been happening, and it's a lot, especially a lot that we've been doing to intervene into this extremely dangerous strategic situation. Yesterday, there was an EIR press availability, that's Executive Intelligence Review and Schiller Institute, with the goal of catalyzing a worldwide movement for a nonviolent mobilization against the danger of nuclear war. It was under the headline, "A Nuclear War Must Not Be Fought and Cannot Be Won." Helga, you participated in this. This was quite an event. Why don't you give us your sense of the importance of this and what was said?
Well, the reason why we decided to conduct such an event was in large part because, there is a growing awareness of many people in the world, in many countries, that we are dangerously close to World War III. And that in the recent period, completely unknown in the European media or not covered by them, there were actually inside the United States a lot of interventions in the election campaign against senators, against congressmen who are known to be the instigators of these confrontational policies. And already a whole army of mostly young activists have confronted these people, saying, why are you condoning and supporting policies which involve the risk of the destruction of civilization? And there's quite a stir about that because one of the most important such people was Diane Sayre, who is the only independent candidate who managed to, despite a very aversive environment in New York, whereby they made the famous rules such that it's almost impossible, and nobody else but her succeeded in collecting 60,000 signatures. But still, despite the fact that she clearly has a mandate from these voters who want her to be in the race, she has been excluded from the only debate between Schumer, the senator in New York, and his challenger from the Republican Party, Pinion. And if you listen to their debate, it was quite boring and had nothing substantial in it. And Diane would have been the only one who would have brought in the danger of nuclear war. And they suspect that that is the main reason why they absolutely did not want her to participate. But because she has a large followership, many of these people decided to conduct on a short-term notice a press availability and bring in the issues which the media and the politicians are trying to suppress. So what came together in this event yesterday was some very outspoken and actually internationally known personalities who addressed the danger of nuclear war. And I just go through the list. One was Stephen Sparr, who is a top-notch nuclear expert from the University of Missouri. Then Scott Ritter, who is very famous because he's one of the most outspoken critics of the present US policies, but also Colonel Senator Richard Black, who is very famous and has a big followership everywhere around the world in the meantime. And then also other people such as Cliff Kiriakoff, former Senate top staff person. Then we had several people from France, General Delavarde, Colonel Corvès, Jacques Cheminade, myself. I probably forgot somebody. So what this was really an important event, and I would urge you to absolutely go to this video, and especially look at the video which was presented by Stephen Sparr, where he had a short video what actually a nuclear war will look like. And I can promise you, if you watch that video, you will not have a good night's sleep, because it will dawn to you that we are sitting on a thermonuclear powder keg, which, if it goes wrong, will lead to the annihilation of civilization in the shortest possible time. And what he there demonstrates with animations, where both the US and Russia have about 1,000 ICBMs. And if there is a sign on the screen of one or the other side that, a missile has gone up, that leaves about 2 minutes to brief the president about the situation. The president then has about 30 seconds to decide what to do. Then it takes another 2 minutes for the missiles to get in launch position, and then a flight time of between 5 and 7 minutes. So maximum, the entire thing from the first warning to the actual, impact is between 10 and 15 minutes. Now you can imagine, that is already implying the greatest possible risk, because misjudgment, false alarm, an accident, all of these things can happen. And naturally, one of the strongest messages which was made by everybody, by Ray McGovern, by Scott Ritter, and the nuclear expert, is what I have been saying for a very long time, that the very idea that you can have a limited nuclear war using only a few tactical nuclear missiles and then stop and then think what you want to do else, that does not exist. Once you use one single nuclear weapons, the entire arsenal will be used. And as becomes very clear in this video, then a nuclear winter will occur for about 5, 7, 10 years, in which there will be no more food production, no more plant life possible. And as a consequence, the people who have not died in the first blast will die in the following year of starvation and horror shows. One can only imagine, not really imagine, just have an inkling. So this is what some people are playing with, and we should note the fact that the head of the US Stratcom, Admiral Charles Richard, just at a conference said, "Oh, Ukraine was just the warm-up. The real big one is coming." And it was this same Admiral Charles Richard who, in February this year, told the Pentagon that the likelihood of nuclear war was moving up from not likely to very likely. And, then one of the discussion points which came up is the Pentagon not aware that the result of this will be a nuclear winter? And I personally think they are not aware, because, they still have this maneuver once in a year called global lightning, which has the idea of using a few tactical nuclear weapons, then a little bit of cyber war, then conventional war. And the whole thing is supposed to be a protracted war of several weeks. And such an option does not exist. So, the illusion that you can conduct a limited nuclear war or win a nuclear war was absolutely challenged by all those experts. And anybody who is concerned about the danger of war, please watch this video and watch the entire discussion, because these are some of the most outspoken and the people with the most expertise you can find. And it was quite noteworthy that assessment coming from American specialists was completely shared with the two military men from France, General Delavarde and Colonel Corvès, who also said that all the videos of Colonel Black and Scott Ritter and Ray McGovern are followed absolutely by the entire military in France. And I know the similar thing is also true for at least some people in Germany. So this is very important. If you don't watch these videos, you don't know what is happening in this field. So, and naturally, then there was a big, discussion that we need to make people aware because unlike, in the early 80s, and so Scott Ritter and both also Ray McGovern, they were in active duty positions during the middle range missile crisis in the beginning of the 80s. So they have first-hand knowledge of what it was to be in the Cuba crisis, what it was to be in the launch on warning situation in the 80s with the SS-20 and the Pershing II. So they say, and that's obvious, that at that time there were hundreds of thousands of people in the street warning of World War III. And now, where the situation is so much more dangerous, there is very little awareness. I mean, it's starting to change now. You have now anti-war demonstrations in Italy, quite significant, in France, in Belgium, in Holland, in Germany. It definitely is gaining momentum. But if you compare what could happen to humankind, namely the complete annihilation, and you contrast that with the knowledge people have, it is almost nothing. Unfortunately, one has to say, and that was also discussed, that the governments who are pushing these policies also obviously are clueless what they are playing with. So this is a must-see. So please go to these website and watch it.
Well, you can see it at the schillerinstitute.com. And I think one of the most exciting things was exciting in the sense that, as you're saying, for a wake-up call, was the dialogue, the discussion that took place between the participants in the latter part of the press availability. And again, outside of what we're doing, we're seeing very little attempt to confront the war hawks with the reality of what they're doing. Now, in that context, you mentioned Diane's campaign. Some of her campaign workers have, in the last weeks, especially the last week, confronted the war hawks at town meetings and left them either speechless or just raving. Confrontation with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, which has been seen now by tens of millions of people across the world. Ilhan Omar, Elizabeth Warren, the senator from Massachusetts, exposing these so-called peaceniks and progressives as really being a front group for the war hawks. Now, most importantly, Obama was confronted by Stuart and Anastasia Battle, and then Pompeo. So, Helga, this is the exemplary kind of action that should be taken by people, nonviolent confrontation of the war hawks, don't you think?
Yes, I think that this is a very important sign that there is a political opposition in the United States to the war. I think this is very important for other people around the world to know, because when you look at the media, you think, that is a monolithic policy, but it is not. And actually, the fact that these young activists have the courage to take on the establishment figures and confront them in this way, it has changed the landscape in the United States already, because many of the so-called alternative media, some of them with actually quite large followers, also comedians such as the Jimmy Dore Show and similar programs, they all have now interviewed Diane Sayre. So she has actually started to break out the effort to contain her campaign. And, there is actually a growing awareness. And I think it's very important that we have a similar thing in Europe, in other parts of the world, because, when we are threatened with the extinction of civilization, this is a matter which should concern every person on this planet. So it's very, very important.
As to your mention of Germany, it's really clear that Germany is the major victim, or one of the major victims, besides, of course, the Ukrainian people, of this war drive. And what we're seeing is, the potential for a split in the coalition around the visit to China by Chancellor Scholz. What's your impression of the importance of this? And is this, in fact, part of the potential for an anti-war sentiment to grow in Germany?
Well, this is very interesting because I think, you have at least two ministers in the German government coalition who are completely in support of the provocative policies coming from the US and the British. Now, this is actually incredible because it means that, these ministers who are supposed to have sworn an oath that they will prevent damage from the German people, forget about it. They are the biggest, what Habeck is doing in terms of the economic policies is going to, it's threatening to crash the German economy completely against the wall. And what this Baerbock is doing, talking about calling China a systemic rival, and pushing all the heavy weapons to Ukraine, saying she will defend Ukraine, even if the German voters don't agree with it. I mean, she's, after all, supposedly a democratic elected official, so the voters can, draw their own conclusion out of that. But there is clearly a situation where Scholz realized, and being obviously, instructed by the top level of the German industry, both the large CEOs of the large corporations, but also the machine tool, the craftsmen, the SMEs, that Germany will not survive this policy. So Scholz, decided to go on this short trip to China. This was also at the 50 years anniversary of the German-Chinese relations, which is obviously very important because, if you look at that, Walter Scheel went to China 50 years ago and he met with Mao Zedong, with Zhou Enlai, with Foreign Minister Xi Jinping, and these were not less communists than the communists are communists today. But if you look at the civilized attitude and the high art of diplomacy, which was portrayed by Scheel and also by Helmut Schmidt, and even later by Foreign Minister Westerwelle, who absolutely had respect for, a different culture and had no such hysteria like you see it right now with these Baerbocks and co. So Scholz went, and it was a very short visit. It was just flying in, having 10, 11 hours meetings with Xi Jinping, with Li Keqiang, and then flying back. But nevertheless, this was extremely important because, Germany right now is already cut off Russia completely. And that means we will have a huge energy crisis in the coming weeks and months. But if Germany now would be cut off of its largest trade partner, China, too, which is what these Greens in the government and unfortunately some FDPers also are pushing, that would be the end of Germany as an industrial nation. And that is sinking in the conscience now of many people. So I think it's very important because, if you look at the figures, how the trade between China and Germany has increased, I think, 1,000 times since the beginning of the diplomatic relations, from about 230 million to 230 billion. I'm now not totally sure about the figures, but it's a huge increase. And 1,000 jobs in Germany depend on the export to China. Then you have large investments, import relations, and this is the entire rise of China. One of the countries who have profited a lot of it was Germany. So the entire living standard in Germany was based on cheap energy imports from Russia and a growing export market in China. And these hooligans, the Greens, are threatening both. So it's very important that Scholz decided to go with a large delegation of German industry to China. And hopefully they have been able to remedy some of the damage which has been done. Not entirely, because if you look at what Xi Jinping said, he quoted Helmut Schmidt, which is quite something, to quote a former chancellor from the same party like that of Scholz, namely the Social Democrats. And he said, quoting Helmut Schmidt, it's very easy to lose trust quickly, and it's very difficult to regain it. And now, obviously, this is a big problem because, if the Chinese, who are always looking exactly what is happening with Russia, they looked at the collapse of the Soviet Union some years back, and they said they will absolutely do everything that this will never happen to China. And in the same way, they look, who is now behaving towards Russia with the sanctions. And so, they say if Germany can do that under the, blackmail from the British and the US, what is preventing them to know, that this could not happen in respect to China. So in that sense, it's very important that Scholz did this visit. And naturally, we are in an extremely fluent situation. Who knows what happens on Tuesday in the election in the United States? If that leads to a significant weakening of the Democrats, we may be in a slightly different geometry. So it's very important that Scholz did that, and hopefully, this can be carried, because if the German industry would put their foot down and really recognize what a danger these screens represent, there may be some hope, but it's quite dangerous.
And Helga, I know you've written an article on this recently, on the need for a change of course in German government policy. I think that will be published by the Executive Intelligence Review. People can look for it on our websites. And also, you've been interviewed repeatedly on Chinese networks for the discussion of what it meant to have this meeting. So that's significant. Now, the other side of this is the attack on Germany was the connection of the explosions of the Nord Stream pipelines. And this became a subject of controversy, especially directed against the British, when the Russian Foreign Ministry called in the British ambassador to Moscow to present a severe démarche, as they said, over evidence that they've presented to the UN Security Council of British hand, both in the Nord Stream pipeline explosion, but also the attack on the Russian fleet in the Sevastopol harbor. Has there been any coverage of this in the West? And is anyone talking about it? Because this was clearly aimed at the British hand in the whole NATO operation against Russia.
Well, compared to the importance of it, I think there is very little coverage. And if there is, they are trying to ridiculize it and play it down as just some typical Russian fake news. But as many experts in Europe and in the United States have expressed, they do not believe that Russia would make such an accusation if they don't have the facts to back it up. So at the UN Security Council, the Russian ambassador Antonov basically presented behind closed doors evidence that the British did have a role in the drone attack against the Russian fleet in Sevastopol, which the Russians were able to deflect and defeat, but also that the British were involved in the sabotage of Nord Stream 2. Now, obviously, this needs to be substantiated with proof and facts. But, we had before all kinds of military experts who basically said that the only cui bono, the only who has the capability, who has the motive, who was at the place at the right moment, all speaks that it was either the United States or one of their allies, and the British have definitely the capacity to do these kinds of things. So, and I think this is really important, and I would really expect the Bundestag, for example, to make a big investigation about that. The government should make an investigation. They should demand, all information. They probably have it already because, that's the other thing. Liz Truss, the short-lived Prime Minister of Great Britain, somebody hacked her smartphone. And there is now evidence that 1 minute after the sabotage of Nord Stream 2, she called up or sent a message to Blinken, it's done. 1 minute after the attack. Now, for that to be coincidence is very unlikely. How was this phone being hacked? Now, that's not so difficult because she used her personal phone and, any data which is collected by anybody like the NSA or the CGHQ and somehow collected and stored is immediately available to all other big players, the Chinese, the Russians. There is no more secret in this way. So I'm quite certain that the evidence will come out. And then, if it is really proven, then obviously the implications of this are enormous. I think for Germany to stay in an alliance with countries who are trying to ruin them economically obviously is an impossibility. So I think this British story is extremely relevant, and I think we should follow it with extreme attention, because that may be one of the things which, can turn the course of history to go in a completely different direction.
Now, speaking of creating a different direction for mankind, you've sponsored a couple of seminars, conferences with former and present elected officials, primarily from Ibero-America, but now it's being expanded. And the discussion process that you've initiated is, how do we create a global citizens movement to achieve the just new financial and security architecture? The next conference of this is November 22nd, and I'd like you to give our viewers a sense of what we've done with this and what you intend at this upcoming conference.
Well, we had in very short distance 2 conferences, which was mainly Latin American parliamentarians and former parliamentarians who all expressed extreme concern about the war danger. And, then out of that came the idea that naturally, it should also concern other elected officials, both active ones and former ones, but not only, these parliamentarians, but also their constituents. And out of this came the idea that when humanity is threatened with World War III, that concerns everybody, and that automatically catapults every citizen to become a world citizen. And Schiller, according to whom the Schiller Institute is named, was of the opinion that there must not be a contradiction between being a patriot of your own country and being a world citizen. And therefore, the slogan of this is, world citizens of all countries unite. Now, some of you may recognize that to be a variation of another call. It comes also from a person from Trier. I'm coming from Trier, so there's a certain historical irony in that. But otherwise, it is really a very important issue, because, I think we must make sure that this video, which I mentioned in the beginning, everybody on the planet should see that, because, we have to get rid of nuclear weapons. I have been of that conviction since a long time. We are also aware of the fact that it's very difficult, because despite some progress in the disarmament, that nuclear weapons constitutes the power of those in the power to those who have the power. So it is very unlikely to get a deliberate, agreement to ban nuclear weapons, despite the fact that it would make complete sense. So there are only 2 ways. One is the way which my late husband had proposed with the SDI, which was adopted by President Reagan on the 23rd of March in 1983, which was basically the idea that the superpowers should work together and develop new technologies which would make nuclear weapons technologically obsolete. And I think that is still something on the table that requires more research, more expertise, because a lot of the weapon systems have changed in the meantime quite significantly. But it's still definitely one approach. The other approach is, to make sure that there is a world public demanding that, and that is what we are trying to do in the short term. And when Mahatma Gandhi, who was the inventor of the non-violent method of resistance, when Nehru, who was obviously his close associate, was asked that in face of nuclear weapons, do you think non-violent methods are sufficient? And then Narwhal Nehru said, given the fact that nuclear weapons are the most violent form of violence, it must be especially non-violent methods to fight against that. So we invite you to participate in that and get the message out to as many of your friends and colleagues as you can, because we definitely are in an extremely dangerous moment, because as long as we have the danger of a blowout of the financial system, the hyperinflation, the collapse of the neoliberal system, and people in the West thinking that the new emerging countries of the global south, of the BRICS, of the SCO, who are all working on a new economic system, that they regard that as a systemic rival and enemy which must be contained, rather than taking up the offer to join it, the war danger will remain. So we will fight to get people in Europe and in the United States to understand that geopolitics must stop, that Europe and the United States must join with the countries of the global south and respond to their demand that colonialism should end. So we are at a very, very important moment in history, and there is every reason to become active. And as Ray McGovern said yesterday, get off your derrière, get off your butt, and start to become an activist with us.
Well, Helga, thanks for joining us today. I think it's absolutely crucial that people take your urging that they watch this video from the event yesterday. It's at schillerinstitute.com under the title, A Nuclear War Cannot Be Won and Must Not Be Fought. And at the same website, you'll be able to register for the conference on November 22nd, which will continue the dialogue. And in fact, it's expanding the dialogue to bring people together around the world on this perspective, which you just heard from Helga. So until next week, you have your homework for you. Join us and use the inspiration from the young people to confront the so-called powerful and force them to acknowledge that, in fact, they have nothing to offer but war and chaos, and let's break their power.